Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith. I'm going to talk about the extreme weather events that have been hammering our planet and people, in the last several weeks. And I'm going to try to tie them to the abrupt climate system change that is presently occurring. So I'm talking about things like, incredible rainfall amounts in parts of Europe, specifically in Italy, a very unexpected tropical cyclone that came through the Middle East, Oman, and caused years and years of rainfall, in a mere hours, and some of the extreme flooding that's been going on in China, and of course. You probably realize that a lot of these events are because of the Arctic warming that is disrupting the temperature balance between the pole and the equator, causing the jet streams to slow down and become wavier and get stuck in place. And this is increasing the frequency, the severity, and the duration of extreme weather events around the planet. And it's also causing extreme weather events to occur in regions where they never occurred before. I'm also going to talk about some very important research that was just published that talks about how the average reflectivity of the entire Earth, or the Earth albedo, which is nominally about 30%, how that has dropped over the last 20 years by about 0.5%, so something like 30% down to 29.5%. Most of that drop being in the last 3 years, in fact, and how this is measured by looking at what's called Earth shine, and that represents a radiative forcing of 0.5 watts per square meter, which is a huge amount. It's 0.5% reflectivity, or 0.5 watts per square meter. And I'll also talk about some recent papers that have come out on the jet streams and how the jet streams, their position is changing. So not only are they becoming wavier and slower, causing the extreme weather events, but their actual location is changing. Now, I've talked in the past how I expect that the center of cold in the Arctic, which is changing, it's transitioning from just south of the North Pole towards the Greenland side, and it will actually shift to just being over Greenland, over the central part of Greenland, when there's no Arctic sea ice. And the central part of Greenland is at 73 degrees north latitude, so how this will represent a fundamental transformation in the air circulation patterns in the atmosphere, in the jet streams, and also weather on our planet and climate. Okay, so I'm going to go into some of the details on these topics, and then I'll in future videos coming very soon, I'll focus on the scientific papers on the so-called global dimming and the jet streams changing location. So this is my website, paulbeckwith.net. If you haven't checked out my last series of videos on the city clobbering asteroid that changed the climate 12,500 years ago, and that destroyed a city 3,600 years ago. This is really fascinating and interesting stuff. So please check out my website, paulbeckwith.net, and please consider donating to my PayPal. It's especially important to me over the next month or so as I start paying some of the expenses for my COP26 trip to the climate conference. I leave in exactly 2 weeks to fly to Scotland to do some preparation, and then get ready for press conferences daily. sometimes multiple press conferences within a day on all of these topics and much more. So please consider donating to my PayPal, and there'll be a GoFundMe set up also to cover specifically to look at covering some of the costs of the trip to this very important climate conference. So this is my YouTube channel, and this is the videos on the asteroids, and I'm also doing a series of videos on different parts, like this was the tropics. I'll be doing one on the Arctic very soon, and on Antarctica, which very interestingly has set cold records in the last number of months, and I'll try to explain why that's occurring. Okay, so on my Facebook page, this is a post on the Earth is dimming due to climate change, and I'll go through the science of why that's happening and what it means. But I want to just show you some of the interesting things that have been going on that I've been tweeting out recently. Here is the interesting pattern that's been set up over North America. Below average temperatures here, above average temperatures here. Of course, in the region here, there's a lot of pressure differences. Therefore, high winds and severe storms are occurring here. Many tornadoes and unusual weather, as there's a clash here between summer and winter conditions. Summer still in the east with extremely warm temperatures. Winter already in the west with below average temperatures. At least 85% of the world's population has been affected by human-induced climate change, a new study shows, and it's in the Washington Post. They often, some of the stories, at least for a while, they don't put behind a paywall, and I don't think this one's behind a paywall. So it talks about the extreme weather events that are climate change caused, or climate system changes behind them. We have a paper called the National Post in Canada, and it's found to be the most inaccurate newspaper on the planet. The study of climate change reporting looked at 5,000 pieces from 4 countries over 15 years, and it found Canada's National Post was actually the worst of them all. Sweden is actually increasing forest biomass, despite being the second largest exporter of paper in the world. It plants 3 trees for every tree that they cut down. This shows you that when trees are planted and very small, they don't absorb a huge amount of CO2. In fact, more can be released. It's only when they're larger and mature that they absorb CO2, and then if they're cut down, of course, that completely stops. We've been seeing some world energy crunches in various countries that are mostly due to, lack of natural gas, spiking natural gas prices. And one of the reasons is, or the main reason is because of the lack of supply due to COVID, going through the supply chains. I highly recommend CO2 monitors for measuring indoor air quality. It's the way you know if there's enough air exchange in an indoor air environment and what the risk will be from catching the virus if you're indoors. The U.S. is now averaging $1 billion disaster every 20 days from climate change. So disaster fatigue's getting worse with more billion-dollar extremes. This will eventually bankrupt the entire country. Yeah, I could go on. I post a lot of interesting physics things, like this is the inertia of a golf ball, which is actually quite an amazing video. Hitting the tee below, it bounces around and comes back, and the ball hasn't moved in that split-second time frame. Nearly a quarter of U.S. critical infrastructure is at risk of being flooded, and there's a study reported by Bloomberg showing how this U.S. critical infrastructure, where it is and how it's being threatened. And, Biden ordered the federal agencies to figure out the biggest climate threats they face, including the military, and they came up with all of these different articles which have been published recently. Here's Canada's boreal forests that used to be a carbon sink, but it steadily collapsed to the point where it emits, now emits CO2, more CO2 than it absorbs, adding to greenhouse gas emissions. And I've mentioned that if we don't slash our fossil fuel emissions, then our emissions from the Earth will become larger and larger and basically take it out of our hands unless we do a crash program in removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Climate change isn't this thing on the horizon that we'll face in 10 years. We're living with it now. Paradise in California is a stark example of what we stand to lose. There's a whole new book out on the destruction of paradise in California from the fires. Okay, and this is an interesting article. If we discovered a distant living exoplanet and could measure that it had lost 70% of its biodiversity within one lifetime of its dominant species, we'd probably lament that we couldn't reach out and help rescue them from their catastrophic demise. Well, this is happening on our own planet. Antarctica's last 6 months were the coldest on record. It's like a separate, with stronger southern annular winds, southern annular mode winds. That's isolating the continent, keeping it extremely cold, much colder than normal, in fact. And I'll explain why that's happening. Okay, so there's all kinds of stuff that I've put on here. Let me move on. Of course, if you go on Twitter and you look for the hashtag climate, you can see the most recent and the latest articles, things about the COP26 climate summit, and lots and lots of interesting stuff. A lot of it which I do talk about. Deforestation. Okay, there's all kinds of stuff there, so I'll delve into the details of some of the what I think are the most important things. Okay, so here we go. Climate change strikes again. The Earth seems to be losing its shine due to the warming oceans. Okay, what seems to be happening is that because the oceans are warming, okay, then it's changing the reflectivity of the Earth. So the study just came out. The Earth's brightness is decreased as a result of warming ocean waters. Okay, so how do we even measure something like that? We measure the Earth's reflectance or albedo using something known as Earth shine to keep track of, well, the Earth's shine. If you gaze at the crescent moon immediately after sunset or before sunrise, you may notice that apart from the dazzling crescent, the rest of the moon appears as a dark but fairly glowy but faintly glowing disk. The light that bounces off the Earth gives the unlit part of a crescent moon a pale glow called Earth shine. And this study measures the actual Earth shine, and it found that the Earth is reflecting about half a watt less light per square meter. Okay, 0.5 watts per square meter less than it did 20 years ago. Most of the decrease was in the last 3 years. This equates to a 0.5% reduction in the Earth's reflectance. So instead of being 30% nominally, it's 29.5%. The reason why this is very important is because this absorbed energy is warming up the Earth more and more. Okay, so I'll talk about the details of this. This shows the watts per square meter decrease, and most of the decrease has been in the last 3 years. Okay, so I'll talk about the peer-reviewed paper. This is another article on the Earth dimming, and I'll talk about this paper next video, the Earth's albedo as measured from Earth shine, how they arrived at that number. On the jet streams, there's a couple recent articles. The jet stream changes could amplify weather extremes by the 2060s. Well, we're seeing that happen now, of course. The jet stream has started an unprecedented shift north, which could wreak havoc on weather in the US and Europe. And I'll also talk about that. The polar jet stream, how it's moving north and out of position. That can cause more droughts and heat waves in southern Europe and eastern USA. Okay, so I'll talk all about that. And this is the article in Science, and it is behind a paywall. I did get access to it, so here it is, linking Arctic variability and change with extreme winter weather in the United States. So I'll talk about that paper also in detail, and this is a different paper on how the North Atlantic jet stream projections are changing in the context of the past 1250 years. And there's a paper here which I'll also is behind a paywall, but I'll talk about all of the details of this paper too. I'll probably do separate videos on each of those three papers. This is a David Suzuki in Canada, very famous environmentalist. He's written numerous books and done all kinds of work, set up his NGOs and foundations, and he's saying, what a mess. He rates the planet's chances of survival very low. He says our politics are all screwed up. Children don't vote. Future generations don't vote. Rivers, oceans, air, they don't vote. And yet we're making decisions that affect these things in a profound way. He's written 43 books on the environment, and he was in on this long-running Canadian TV program called The Nature of Things. And he's just saying, he spends a lot of his time in Australia at the moment, and he's saying, that we're after a lifetime examining humankind's destruction of the environment, he says he finally understands the root cause of our destructiveness. He believes it's come late in our existence as nomadic hunter-gatherers understood the complex web of relationships between air, water, animals, and plants for thousands of years, but then we got into farming. That was a major step away from living with nature. It allowed people to get specialized. The rise of Judeo-Christian ideas saw nature as something to be used or exploited by mankind. This thinking later accelerated to industrialization. And after the Industrial Revolution we began our shift when we think we're no longer bound by natural laws. We can build a vehicle that will travel faster than the speed of sound. With telescopes and microscopes and big machines, we can now do what no other animal ever did. We can escape gravity, for God's sakes. We can live in outer space or under the ocean. So this completes the notion that we are so special. The only limitation to human progress is our imagination. But, we seem to be proving to be incapable of managing our own affairs, let alone the problems affecting the planet. Okay, and, we've got to beat climate change, otherwise the alternative is horrifying. We've got no choice. He says that if we don't, then our societies will have a short existence on this planet, and we'll have little to show for it. Future geologists or paleontologists, when they start looking at the layer record to see the Anthropocene, the period that we're in now, the primary things they would find in that very thin layer of time would be plastic, radioactive isotopes, cement, and chicken bones, the legacy of our civilization. Okay, I've talked a lot about wildfires recently. It was a horrific summer for wildfires. We don't hear so much about Siberian fires. Russian fires, we hear about the ones in the U.S., but, fires in California this year stunned forest stewards with their size and intensity, also in BC, but they look puny compared to the fires there were in Siberia. In Russia, a report from Greenpeace estimated that 65,000 square miles burned, more than 6 times the area burned in the U.S. so far this year. At their peak in August in Siberia, 190 blazes were spreading across Sakha and Chukotka, Russia's farthest northeastern regions. In July and August, wildfires in northeastern Russia released 806 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's more carbon than the emissions of the entire country of Germany. Okay, and that's just increasing. Okay, and the temperatures in the north, like the Russian town of Verkhoyansk, reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's north of the Arctic Circle. These Arctic heat waves would be impossible without climate change, according to attribution studies. here's some of the peaks of the fires, and you can compare to other years if you go to the site called Global Forest Watch. Okay, so those are bad. Now I talked also, here we go with the rainfall and the hydrology. Over 2 feet of rain fell in Italy in only half a day, something not seen in Europe before. Okay, 29 inches, 742 millimeter in 12 hours. Okay, it mentions the Oman tropical cyclone that dumped years worth of rainfall, bringing deadly floods to the desert landscape that rarely sees that much rain in an entire year. So Italy, the storm, it was like, in Seattle, for example, they get 36 inches a year. I mean, they had 36 inches of rain in a town in Italy, 60 miles southwest of Milan. That's 925 millimeters. And, that fell in a day. Okay, this other town got 20 inches in 6 hours. Okay, 500 millimeters of rain in 6 hours. And there's a site called Floodlist where you can see all of these things. Okay, Hurricane Ida hit Central Park in early September. It dumped 3 inches in an hour. It broke a previous 1-hour record set 11 days earlier when Tropical Storm Henri soaked the region. So this is the rain in the desert of Oman, in a city after this tropical cyclone went through. There's also, of course, a warming globe allows more room for rainfall. For every degree Celsius rise in air temperature, which is every 1.8 Fahrenheit increase in air temperatures, the atmosphere can retain roughly 7% more water vapor. And, it's not just, it's around the world, okay? July in Western Europe, city streets in Belgium and Germany turned into torrents of water. Central China in July had huge rainfall and floods. It's also having rainfall and floods now, etc., etc. So if you go to this, if you Google floodlist.com and go to this site, you can get all of the articles on flooding around the world. So this is Italy, October 4th, showing some of the flooding, and there's there's river flow rates, just spiking up like delta functions, and incredible amounts of damage. There's all kinds of details and images from those floods. So if you want to find out about a flood, floodlist.com is a great site to check out. Now I just went on Earth Null School to October 4th to Italy, and I'm looking at the 3-hour precipitation accumulation. Okay, and you can cycle through and see, I'm going backwards here, an hour, and you can see, so this is in the morning, 7 a.m. local time on the 4th, and you can see as the day proceeds, as I'm cycling through, you can see there was more and more rainfall accumulating in these regions here. Or you can look at the convective available potential energy. So that's the energy in the atmosphere, and you can see this string of high energy. Lots of storms, clipping Italy here. Total precipitable water or total cloud water. And you can scroll through the time and see how it moved across Italy. Okay, so this innocuous looking behavior on Earth Null School shows how Italy got this deluge, incredibly high rainfalls, and then this cyclone in Oman that tracked through the Gulf of Oman, and the water was very, very warm temperatures here. Okay, so anything above 27.5, everything above the yellow, that amplifies cyclone activity. This was the path of the cyclone, and again you can see it on Earth Null School. You can see it here, and then it starts to move across build strength as it moves across the very warm water in the Gulf of Oman, gaining intensity, and then coming ashore and causing tremendous flooding and causing years and years worth of rainfall. Okay, thank you for listening. And also, I haven't forgotten, I've shown a lot of information from State of the Climate in 2020, this document, and I'm going to talk all about what this document says about the Arctic and also Antarctic in future videos, and put it in the context of abrupt climate change, and also what's been happening with the melt season in the Arctic this year, etc., etc. Okay, so thanks again for listening, and please remember to check out my website, paulbeckwith.net, and please consider supporting my work by donating to my PayPal account, especially in light of the fact that I will be going to COP26, and I have quite a few expenses for the airfare and Airbnbs and so on for the travel, also paying for paying for COVID testing, etc., etc. So please consider donating to support my efforts to bring this information to the world at COP26. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.